Let's do this. Heck yes.
Yes.
All right. What's up, everyone? We are back at Women in Technology International, and we are sitting down with Radhika Iyengar-Emens.
Correct.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. And we are going to talk about all the incredible work that you guys have been doing with blockchain consulting, and also the future of what this technology is going to be like. Yeah.
Big stuff happening.
Big stuff is happening. What I always like to ask this to people that are pioneering the blockchain technology moving forward is, how did you even find out about the technology in the first place?
Crypto investing.
Crypto investing in like 2 years ago, or how many years ago?
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, I'd say, is when I started dabbling, and it was really more so Ethereum, Bitcoin, but then I started getting into alts. And so obviously last year was a decent year, and this year we've been in a bear market. I don't see that changing too much. I'm not going to give any grand predictions or anything about this year. For various reasons, it's been kind of having a tough time this year, but that's how I got into it. But what really got me excited was by way of healthcare. So I'm a digital healthcare expert, and when I looked at the technology itself, fundamentally as a technology and its applications in healthcare, I got really excited. In fact, I really haven't been this excited about a technology in a really long time. So it feels amazing to be part of this. And if you're at all in the blockchain space, you understand that people that are involved in this space are just hopping right now. I mean, it's electric energy. Every single event you go to, I was just recently at Consensus in New York, and they were, I think, forecasting 4,000 people. I think they said that it was about 8,500, and I think it felt like 10, 12,000 people. It was amazing, a totally amazing experience, and it was all week long. So that's kind of the energy factor that we're talking about. And Silicon Valley is, I'd say, a little bit behind in terms of the technology aspect, but compared to many other parts of the world. But I think it's catching on feverishly here too. So my colleagues and I are involved very much in a lot of the events and programs and exciting stuff that's happening in the space at the moment.
So you were in digital health before this?
I still am. So now I evangelize on blockchain in healthcare. So I keynote a lot of conferences these days.
You know Marquesa Finch and Vanessa Mason?
I do know Marquesa. Marquesa moderated the Women in Blockchain panel at Global Blockchain Forum.
Sweet.
And she's amazing. Yes. So yes. And who was the other person you mentioned?
And Vanessa Mason, her partner.
Vanessa Mason. I don't know Vanessa. I do know Marquesa.
Yeah, good.
And she and I are both in the healthcare space. So we're both equally passionate and excited about the future of healthcare as enabled and amplified and enhanced by blockchain.
Yes. I'm glad that this is now something that you are even going to things like the Massive Consensus event, doing panels about it.
Absolutely.
So let's... Oh man, I'm happy that this. We have a good amount of intros, I think, that can help one another with what we're both doing, which is fantastic.
Terrific.
So managing partner at Double Nova Group.
Yes.
So that's been doing blockchain strategy now for a little while.
Our background as Double Nova has been more so enabling companies to scale, to grow, to do fundraising activities here in the Valley, to connect ecosystems. So a lot of the work we do is international. Which is another aspect that I like blockchain so much, is that it is global. But as Double Nova, we've worked with companies from around the world. We've worked with governments and accelerators, running programs, showcasing technologies that come out of those ecosystems, building bridges across ecosystems. And so that's, our background. My background is as a serial entrepreneur. And my colleague as well. And so we've gotten involved in all of that in the past. And I've been involved in digital health probably about 6 years or so. Was very active on the leadership team of Health 2.0 Silicon Valley. Still have a lot of good friends in that space, and collaborated with them on numerous programs as well. And when I came across blockchain, as I mentioned, I was really looking at that application of blockchain in healthcare, and I thought, wow, this is tremendously transformative. We may have to, crawl before we walk, before we run. There are paces.
And then we ball after we run.
Exactly. So, there's paces that the technology has to take. Obviously, this is a relatively new technology, and it has to go through its throes of growing. But the application and the future that it promises is really exciting. So
yeah.
But anyway, that's kind of the background with Double Nova, and what we're doing these days is helping companies with implementing blockchain strategy, or the strategy of implementation.
Yes. So let's get to how you're doing give examples of implementation. And while we do this examples of implementation, we can do just a very quick definition of the technology for people as well.
Sure.
Decentralized, immutable, ledger, digital
you
ledger.
know very well. Yeah.
Let's just keep it 4 words, quick, and so let's give an example.
So let's. So I think let's talk about maybe just a rough idea of what blockchain is. Blockchain is really a distributed ledger technology. Think of it like a very sophisticated spreadsheet of sorts, whereas one spreadsheet might be centralized. You have the whole spreadsheet in one location. Blockchain is kind of a distributed ledger. So the information is distributed across many different points or nodes, right? I guess the 4 pillars that we talk about, my colleague wrote a paper on this. The 4 pillars of blockchain are, as you mentioned, the immutability, ultra-secure aspect of blockchain, right? The records and themselves and the security level around that. Number 2 is decentralization. So we talked about centralized versus decentralized. Almost everything that we know today is centralized, and therefore offers a single point of failure, as we call it. So blockchain is completely decentralized. Then the third thing is gamification. So if you've known anything about video game world, and everything is gamified, incentivized. And so blockchain offers a community aspect that is also incentivized. So you incentivize the behavior of the community, not only on the user side, but also on the developer side. So it's very much of a community effort. And then it's also gamified and incentivized. That's a very different shift from what we have all been used to so far. And then the last thing is open source software. So there's no proprietary IP. It's all open source. So it makes for a really exciting environment, because when you get everybody involved in this and thinking about things in a completely new manner, it's the scope of what that offers which makes blockchain very interesting. Now, a lot of people think of blockchain and they think of maybe Bitcoin. And so the difference is Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of those are cryptocurrencies. They're examples of the application of blockchain. Yep. But it's not equivalent to blockchain, right? Blockchain itself it's a technology that you use. And so what's exciting about blockchain is that when you start looking, and not all blockchains are created equal. Not all blockchains are just the ultra secure aspect of it itself. It's not just the one element that has to be there. If you have multiple elements there, that's when it really becomes ultra secure. So blockchain is now being used with really sophisticated encryption technologies. The background of blockchain is really from cryptography. So we've got some really exciting cryptographic techniques that are now interwoven with blockchain technology to be able to offer the kinds of things that are having CIOs awake at night these days. So everything around data, all of the debacles that we've been seeing with Cambridge Analytica, all of these things that we are now hearing about, that we've known about, but are really, I think the consciousness is more alive around that right now in terms of the problems we have around that. And so everybody's thinking about, well, what happens to my data, right? And so if you want privacy, security, trust, identity, all of those things really protected around your data, blockchain has the capability, along with cryptographic techniques, to be able to enable that. Then you get even more exciting with blockchain if you start marrying that with deep tech. So AI, ML, or IoT, or other deep tech sort of technologies. That confluence of technologies then becomes even more compelling. So this is kind of the future that we're seeing with blockchain. What do we do with companies when we talk about blockchain strategy? That just depends on the company, right? I mean, what's exciting is that if you're a small company or a large company, you can implement blockchain. You can use blockchain. So it could be an existing company that says, I've got some issues with supply chain, and I want to be able to track all of the different components down the line. I want to be able to audit all of it. I want to know the provenance of all of this. And so that's a great use case, for example, in blockchain. My panel tomorrow in the morning will be talking about use cases. My perspective is on healthcare, but us as a panel will be talking about real world applications of blockchain. anybody can really look at the benefits that blockchain offers. And so what we do is work with companies sometimes to figure out, well, what does that look like? What are the kind of problems you're having right now? Is it around identity and trust? Is it around, do you want to incentivize behaviors within your community, for example? Do you want to have audit trails or transparency across your data? So there's many different things that blockchain can do. It's to understand what your objective is, and then to help you develop a roadmap of how do you implement blockchain to be able to arrive at the solutions that you are looking for. So that's, in a very large umbrella way, what we do.
You did a really good job at explaining it.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And
we spent a long time working with it.
Yeah, yeah. And all of the nuance of the technology and its importance can be applied in different ways to different companies to help them.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. And there's some, what's exciting is with any new technology, there's obviously going to be some low-hanging fruit as far as applications, right? Things that have been plaguing people and, the thorns in our side, so to speak, and more urgent thorns. And they might be, when you think about it, they might be seemingly simple, but it can be saving a company thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, right? Pharmaceutical companies, for example, are really excited about what blockchain can offer because all of the issues that many pharmaceutical companies have been having with counterfeiting of drugs, fake drugs, right, can solve this by the use of blockchain because, as you know, from using the chain of the blocks that are in the chain, is that once the record is in the blockchain, it's immutable, right? It can't be changed. And so when you think about all of the record keeping and transparency,
problem to have the potential breach of a blockchain with the network being controlled by only a certain amount of groups that have over 50% of the mining control?
The thing is that there are many different ways. So not all blockchains, as I mentioned, are created equal. And there are many different ways to prevent those kinds of situations from happening. Without getting too technical in this interview, I'll just suffice it to say that there are many different ways that you can solve that problem. The 51% attack that you're talking about, obviously from a theoretical standpoint, it can be done, but it has to be done with enormous computing power to be able to do that kind of thing all at once. The more nodes you have, the more difficult it gets to pull that off. And the beauty of blockchain is once you've written it in, then you're not going to be able to go back and do it. So in order to retrace your steps and, forge something or fraudulently represent something, really difficult to do. It's not something that's going to be happening just automatically.
But now, when we have all these massive mining farms and when they're in control by only a couple people that can collude.
And those are considerations that you have to look at. And the thing is that that's the proof of work model. If you're doing the proof of stake model, that's a different model altogether. Again, don't want to get too technical about this, but there's many different ways you can do this. I think if you were in the early days and you're doing Bitcoin, whatever, then that's the proof of work model. There's now proof of stake. And so that's a very different model that we're seeing.
Proof of stake doesn't have the 51% attack?
Not, again, proof of work has more of a capability of being able to do that. Again, it depends on the computing power. So people are saying, well, if you have quantum computing, you can do this sort of thing. Yes, theoretically, absolutely, it's possible. But quantum computing is, I think, a little bit away. So we have a tiny edge right now. I'm not saying that edge is going to last forever, because I think hackers, as much as developers, people who are developing this, are progressing at rapid rates. So I'm not going to say it's not going to be completely, untouchable forever. But what we have right now is a whole lot better than what the problems that we've been having.
It's the beginning of the decentralization movement.
Yes.
And so right before, on the way to quantum computing, we'll continue stress testing the technology.
Correct.
In many different ways and make it better over time.
Correct.
Totally.
And I think that, I'm glad we're talking about all of this because it kind of segues into my thesis as well as my colleague's thesis on the beauty of enterprise right now. We are sitting at a point where enterprise is really starting to take off. We're talking, just thousands and thousands and thousands of projects, right? 37,000 projects that are out there, pilots, and way more than ICOs have. in enterprise.
What does a enterprise pilot mean?
It means that they are testing out implementation in a pilot case and to see how successful it is. But there are a lot of pilots going on. And
in just the US, there's 37,000?
I think, well, that's a very good question. I think in the US.
And these are mostly enterprise software, right?
It is. And so the thing is that with enterprise, what we're finding is...
And now you want to apply blockchain technology to the enterprise.
Right, exactly. And the enterprise is very much looking at this. They're already looking at it. The pharma industry, as I've mentioned, is really excited about this. Insurance tech is looking at this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different sectors, manufacturing, logistics. These are all areas that are looking at this saying, wow, there's an amazing use case coming out of this technology. So I think the beauty of where we are in enterprise is a lot of the enterprise applications are moving into more public permissioned chains.
For access control?
Yes, exactly. And so, you're working with trusted nodes. So if you know anything about the node systems in blockchain, this again comes down to that whole hackability and, how do you do the 51% attacks, et cetera. If you're looking at enterprise systems, they're almost all right now going to be looking at permission chains, right? IBM Hyperledger Fabric, for example, JP Morgan's Quorum, for example, these are all permission chains, right? And so when you think about permission chains, you're basically saying, look, it's not the big public at large kind of thing that everybody's been talking about. It's trusted nodes. And because they're trusted nodes, you're going to be less vulnerable to that extent because you've kind of vetted out who has access to all of this.
Like the general hospital can tap into your biometric data.
It's a trusted node, right? It's a trusted node and so trusted stakeholders in the ecosystem, right? And so when you're talking about that, you're going to say, well, security level might be not quite so high, but then you get a lot of transaction speeds as well because now you're able to control what happens within that controlled environment, so to speak. And so what we're seeing in the next 2 years is that enterprise is going to be just hopping out of off the charts.
$50 million fund. You need a $5 billion fund.
We're starting with a bite size. Obviously, if there's more, there's more. But that's our goal with StarChain Ventures. Yeah. Our thesis is actually focused on enterprise blockchain, so we're and also foundational technologies and protocols, like I mentioned, because what we're seeing where we're at in terms of blockchain.
So before you get to the protocols, because we'll let's get there. But on the way, you mentioned these massive industries, and are you hyper targeting then pharma and insurance? Are these the big dogs? Who else are the big dogs?
Right now, I would say anybody that's in fintech, in logistics, in manufacturing, in pharma, in insurance tech, even healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of different sectors that are looking at this. I would say
that's pretty much everything.
Yeah, I mean, it has a transformative potential.
Damn.
In terms of what's going to happen when and how quickly. Obviously, that's the crystal ball question, right?
Which one of those is going to go first?
I mean, I think that we have a lot of amazing use cases. That's the beauty. I mean, if you look at the way banks are implementing this, for example,
probably the more expensive items, like maybe a car, which is going to, or things that are in one, maybe a dose, like a pharmaceutical, is also can be very expensive with the rare drugs for orphan diseases.
That's one use case, but another use case is, for example, specific luxury goods, or like wine or that kind of thing. It can be a luxury good and saying, well, how do I know that thing is not fake?
Fake.
Right?
Fake news.
There's that too. Yeah. Actually, there's a really cool company out of China that is called Primus that's working on the whole fake news aspect of things, right?
Deep fakes are pretty intense.
If you look...
Yeah, they're pretty intense. You can't tell the difference now.
If you look at the essence of blockchain, it's really to bring that transparency to what we're doing. And so the people that are involved in counterfeit activities and fake anything, it's really going to put that entire world topsy-turvy, right? And then this technology has that exciting potential. Again, as far as what kinds of use cases we're seeing in the near term, like 18 months, 24 months kind of timeline, pretty much enterprise. I would say that's really where the action is at.
Yeah.
If you think of, the .com days and how that played out, again, a lot of people tend to not remember very accurately or just conveniently forget or what have you that, what was the first biggest e-commerce site back in the day?
eBay?
Cisco? Yeah. And what do they make?
Did they make
routers?
They made wireless
hardware,
infrastructure. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so you think about that and they go, they had the biggest e-commerce site, right?
That was like the 80s?
90s, late 90s,
that was
right?
late 90s?
Well, actually, Cisco in the big, I think that was actually 94. So, I mean, I think what's really cool is that, you know, we're going through the throes, right? That's the most important thing to remember is when you look at any emerging technology, there's going to be an adoption curve. You have to start somewhere. There are going to be some important things that we have to resolve in blockchain, like transaction speeds, like the energy usage, for example. And so when you think about proof of work versus proof of stake, there's a big difference there in terms of the energy consumption.
Is proof of work like
that one has
order of magnitude more?
Very, very big. And so what you're talking is a lot of people complain about that, saying, well, the energy consumption is so high. Again, you have to think about what is the end result, right? Start with that, and that's why we work. Yeah. Well, it might be. It might be ultra security. If you're, you know, a bank and you're transferring just tremendously high volume of dollars or currency somewhere, you want the ultra high security. You might compromise on speed. But you'll say, I don't want to compromise on security. So again, what is the end goal? This comes down to that strategy portion, right? Start with that end goal. What do you really want out of it? Prioritize what you want out of it.
And then when you
that will dictate how you're going to implement it, what you're willing to say, I'm willing to, you know, balance the trade-offs. It's always about trade-offs, right? It's never going to be that perfect, right? Okay, so what are the trade-offs? And prioritize what you want so that you can say, I'm willing to compromise on X or Y because I really want Z, right? And so that's the kind of thing that you have to think through, and that's what we help companies do, is evaluate where do you want to be and how are you going to implement this, and what are the trade-offs involved, and how do you figure out a roadmap that makes sense for you?
So it's as we consult with companies and they figure out how to implement this technology within the organization, it's figuring out the balance between the trade-offs. Meanwhile, the technology is going to figure out how to maybe, and the teams that are building it are maybe going to figure out how to not have any trade-offs in the future.
Exactly. I mean, you know, ultimately, I think as the technology matures, I think there's going to be tremendous excitement around what that true potential, the ultimate potential is going to be. But for right now, I think the vision is there. What you have to think about is, again, how am I going to go about this? What trade-offs am I willing to live with? Because this is what I want to get out of it. And so I think that's really the thought process. You know, what if you're a young company, an entrepreneur, and you're thinking, well, I'm going to do this project and I'm going to do an ICO or whatever, that's a different strategy altogether. And so the blockchain strategy we help companies do on that score is not just the business side, but we'll help with the tokenization models, for example, tokenomics, as we say, as well as, you know, token distribution. What does that look like? The marketing effort, all of that needs to come together in order to be able to do the ICO, for example. So that's a very different aspect altogether. But that's, you know, on the strategy side. You know, my colleague and I are also, as I said, mentioned raising a fund. And so for us, the fund is really exciting because we get to look at what the next generation of technology offers.
And now, platforms and protocols.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
So if you think about the internet, we often refer to a great graphic that Union Square Ventures put out comparing the two. So if you look at the internet, there was a very thin protocol layer and a very fat application layer. It's exactly the opposite in blockchain. There's a very fat protocol layer and there's a very thin application layer for now. Right.
You think it'll stick that way or balance?
No, for now, this is where we're at because people are building the foundational elements of this, right? Whether it's, you know, foundational protocol and, you know, for example, interoperability. I mean, I talk a lot about that in healthcare. So that's a foundational type of protocol or a foundational platform that we need is that interoperability element. So these can be things that we need to do right now so that tomorrow we can actually build scalable applications. Right? And so what we're focusing now in the next 24 months is that. And that's where we think the action is at. And we're looking at the enablers of tomorrow. Let's just, from a very, very high level, that's kind of one way to look at it.
So you really like the new protocols that are being made, because those protocols can then be used for pharma applications or
for anything, right? I mean, for many different areas, many different use cases. And so what we're looking at is that foundational protocol, because you can do many different things with it, and it doesn't have to be just focusing on one sector. It can be applied in any given sector that you think, wow, the potential is really exciting in this particular sector, and the adoption is going to be maybe sooner here than there. So that's where we're going to look at all of those and say, okay, where are we going to go with this? And so what we're betting on right now is, when we start looking at companies that we're going to be investing in, is exactly that, saying where are the enablers of tomorrow. Now, that having been said, we will keep our eyes open for like the one-offs that we see, and saying what could be the next big winner, even on the application side. And we wouldn't want to miss out on those kinds of deals either.
What about that was a bit on protocols. What about platforms? Again, what would the difference be between that?
A platform is where you can bring many different people to enable many different people to come together to do something. I know it's a very general way to explain that, but think about it from an ecosystem standpoint. A platform can be where multiple stakeholders can plug into that, and you're enabling, let's say you're in healthcare. Okay, and you're doing a healthcare platform. You want to be able to have the providers, the patients, the insurance companies, maybe even pharma companies all come together, and you're building this platform, which is sort of able to deal with all the different components, right? That's one application, or one way to look at it. When you start bringing a lot of people together on something, that's what a platform does. That's what a platform is supposed to do. And so interoperability is one of those things where that could be a platform, where you're developing an interoperability platform where many different people can come together. If you think about a company that does, enables APIs, for example, with many different stakeholders, right, and makes it interoperable, that's an example of a platform, for example. So we're looking at different people that are looking at those kinds of problems and saying, okay, that might be usable in, again, many different areas. It's not like it's just usable in one sector. It can be applied across many different sectors. And so that's something that we would look at and say, well, that looks exciting because it has multiple uses. Again, many people would use that to do something else. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What is we always like to talk about the balance between the "we are one" mentality and the importance of geopolitical leadership. Where do you think that balance lies?
Globally, you mean? Yeah. Well, the beauty is with blockchain is that the geopolitical leadership is in many different areas. I think, if you look at the ICO activity, for example, that's a really great area where you look at geopolitical leadership. There are many small countries, Switzerland, Malta, Gibraltar, Estonia, Singapore, all of these are small countries, basically, that are saying, or small locations that are saying, we want to attract a lot of these companies that are involved in blockchain. So they have these very clear guidelines on what you need to do in their jurisdiction to be able to do something like this. And that's a real equalizer, I think, globally, because in the past, I think it's been where one or two places might have had that nexus, if you will. We've been very spoiled in Silicon Valley, being a nexus for so much of entrepreneurial activity. I think Silicon Valley is definitely a big player globally, but it's not the only player. And I think that what's happening across the globe in blockchain is that a lot of people are sitting up and taking notice and saying, we want to develop these very clear guidelines so that it invites people to do certain activities like ICOs, for example. But if you think of technology itself, there are governments, for example, that have banned the ICOs, but they haven't banned the technology. They're actually promoting the technology very heavily. China is one where they said, well, we don't want those ICOs. We don't want cryptocurrency necessarily to be there. I mean, we don't want that, but we want technology to be implemented. So actually the government is encouraging and supporting all businesses to take a look at this, just at large. And so if you think about geopolitical leadership and what that means that in order to be a player in this space, you really have to be all hands on deck, everybody on board with this, right? And I think that's where I think the U.S. has room for growth. we're just kind of seeing a very careful sort of path that the U.S. has taken, and it is the way it is at the moment. I'm just saying that, in the face of geopolitical leadership, they have to balance that and saying, well, if they want to be a geopolitical leader in this space, they're going to have to think through certain things much faster than they have been. And they are trying to work on it, not saying they aren't. It's just that, there are a lot of other ecosystems that are moving really fast into this. And so that determines the face of geopolitical leadership from that perspective.
Definitely. So give us an explanation here. What is the difference between like an ICO of a company and an ICO of a country? Because ICO of a company, I have like 10 million coins, and then I sell these coins for a penny each, or whatever you might want to sell your coins for. Yeah. And then that's the funding that you get for your company.
I wish I was as knowledgeable on the ICOs for countries.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's wild, right? I mean, then there are many countries that are saying, well, we need to have a cryptocurrency for the nation as well. I think that, it's kind of like, maybe it's when you look at cryptocurrency in general, typically what you're looking at is the reason why you'd want to have that token, right? There has to be a utility value associated with that token, fundamentally, right? Now, I'm not talking about investing in that and it's a security versus utility. I'm not talking about that conversation. What I'm talking about is fundamentally with a token, you're going to have a utility value. So why would a government want that? I mean, a government could potentially use that token not only as a monetary currency, but it could be a currency that provides access to services that are supported by the government, right? And it could be housing, it could be medical services, it could be financial services, it could be many different types of services that governments, education services, there are many different types of services that a government could be very interested in from issuing a token that then gives you access to those services, right? And so it's a different model altogether of thinking about things. And so in the emerging markets, that's one of the big exciting aspects is how do you use something like this to enable services to the people that need the services, right?
So it's tokens for access.
It's access. That's really what you're giving. Because otherwise, why would you own that? Now, if you say, well, I want to own it because it's going to go up in value, that's obviously security, right? But fundamentally, when you think about a token, you're thinking about access to something, to service, usually. So what's really exciting is, for example, Finland has adopted these, I guess they're blockchain identity cards of sorts to refugees in refugees camps. They don't have a legal identity.
Do you know who Tony Lynn Casserly is from Culture?
I don't.
I'll have to link
another intro.
But
I mean, that's an interesting, think about what they have. They've got this identity card of sorts through blockchain to be able to access services because they don't have the usual thing that the citizens of that country have. And so they had to find a different way of providing service. And I'm thinking, wow, that's really cool. We don't have that here, right? And, it's a way of providing access to something. And so I think that's the game changer here. So when you think about why governments would want it, why entities would want it, it's really about providing access to something, right? And it can be, again, coming back to that incentivization as part of that blockchain, that's what's exciting. I mean, think about what we give up in order to have access to email, free email or whatever, or you have an email account, but you're providing data.
We become the product.
Exactly, precisely, right? And so it's not free, right? You're actually providing, but you don't have any say in where that data gets implemented or utilized or mined. And so, I mean, GDPR is all about that, saying you have the right to say, do you authorize the use of this to go towards a certain thing? In a blockchain society, all of us are incentivized, companies as well as individuals. So an individual might be incentivized to have that token because it provides access to something. On the flip side, the company provides or pays for access to your data. So everybody sort of wins in this model, right? Right now, so much money is being made out of what we offer up. And yes, we are offering it up, but sometimes we don't necessarily understand the breadth of what we're actually offering or the depth of the implication around it. And
I'm excited to get paid
this is a
data.
much more conscious decision-making process of what you're offering up and what you're accessing. And I think that's a transformational shift in thinking.
It is, yeah. So we had someone on our show teaching us, Ahmed Amer, who was teaching us about how if we treated data more like memory, like if we treated it more like our memories, that we would be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more
judicious, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Judicious, vigilant in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has to be a conscious and a deliberate sort of thought process, right? So I think that's what's exciting, is that we'll all be forced to sort of think through things a little bit more deeply, and not be so casual about the way we do something, right? I mean, we may be still casual. I mean, somebody might say, I really don't give a hoot about this. I'm just going to let them do whatever they want. That's fine. That's your choice. But the point is, you should have that choice, right? And so it's all about having those conscious choices, which I think from a society standpoint, I mean, we're definitely at that point where we need to offer more conscious choices about things.
Let's ask you a couple questions now. We'll ask you a couple of our simulation questions. So we asked you about the geopolitical one. That one sounds a little interesting and hard to answer. We also ask about wealth inequality, and this is a tough question. What do you think about exponential technology kind of increasing the wealth inequality, even though everyone at the bottom is slowly coming up, the ones at the top are going really fast?
Well, here's what's exciting on that front. If you think of, we actually recently supported the campaign for Ben Bartlett. Do you know Ben? He's the vice mayor of Berkeley.
Okay.
He ran recently for state assembly, and he has written paper about this as well as evangelized on this topic, saying if we all had to be paid for our data, that might end up being roughly about a universal basic income.
We've talked about that so much on the show. We love that.
Right? And so you think about
that. That he was actually one that authored that.
Yeah.
He authored that?
Well, he didn't author that concept, but he said that that's something that's achievable, and he was actually pioneering the use of municipal bonds, as well. And so, again, transformative thinking, visionary thinking in local government. I mean, we need that, right? And so when you think about equality, when you think about access, when you think about equalizing or democratizing access to various things. Again, I think the future of this technology is pretty profound when you think about how people are going to go about thinking about certain things. Because right now, we don't even know what our data is being used for. If you had the knowledge of what that data was being used for, and you had the chance to be incentivized to opt in for something, and somebody paid you for that, you could very easily be making roughly on the order of a UBI, right? Yep. And so that is transformative in its thinking. Yeah. And then it provides you not only access to so having, say, a token that comes part of that conversation as well. Now you have access to things that you might need, like healthcare or education or housing or what have you. So when you think about a democratization and equalization, in society, I think these are things that we can start thinking about, saying there are creative ways that we can solve some of the problems that plague us today. Yep. Even from a society standpoint.
Yep. I like how your answers are circling back to blockchain technology. yeah, that's good. Because it is very true that the push for decentralization and the push for transparency will make a radical shift on inequality and a radical shift even on globalization. That's good.
And that's the whole social good aspect of things, right? Yeah. I mean, we're really sitting at the cusp of something really exciting here, fundamentally exciting. That's why I love talking about it, because I don't think I've seen a technology that's gotten me this excited about so many different aspects and layers to this, right? Whether you're talking about society and social impact, whether you're talking about, just fundamentally different ways of thinking about things. We need that. we can't be stuck in the rut that we've been, right? But the internet was created for a very different purpose. It was created for open communication. Email was the first application on the internet, right? So it was a very different purpose altogether. And, the purpose of blockchain is something different, right? And so obviously there's things that we have to do to get better at certain things, and there's things that we need to work at, but fundamentally I think it has the ability to solve some of the systemic challenges that we've had so far.
What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
In terms of, come again, for context.
In general?
Just in general? I think, I happen to think this is a thinking global kind of mindset that I've always had since I was a little girl. My personal story is that I was born in India. I was raised in Morocco. I grew up in Tangier in the Straits of Gibraltar, right across from Gibraltar, as a matter of fact. Interestingly enough, how that's on the map now. And that was a gateway kind of mentality, gateway mindset, gateway culture. East meets West, North and South. And, so I think my whole background has been about thinking global. And so what I really get excited about is when I think about that one world. I don't know if we'll ever achieve that capability of being one world, but I think that that's really what we need to be doing and thinking about. If you've seen anything about astronauts that have gone up into space and looked at the big blue marble and think about the profound impact that image had on their manner of thinking and looking at this big blue marble where we live as one world, I mean, that's a pretty profound concept.
Totally.
And I think that, too often, we're here and we have our little bubbles, whatever our microcosm is, and we stay in that little microcosm and don't think beyond it and think about what the person next door is doing, what the city next door is doing, what the next country is doing, what the next planet or the next continent is doing, what the next planet is doing. I think that whole thinking about all of us, if we really thought carefully as a human race and thought about one world, I think that's something that's really beautiful. It's very profound, and it's something that I think about because the whole point of connecting these ecosystems in the way that I do using technology, that's something that gets me really excited because it's a way that I see technology being able to build bridges across different ecosystems in a way that we often don't do from a cultural and societal perspective.
Since we're at the Women in Technology Summit, what do you think is a good way to maximize the potential of women and young women into our world?
I think that the opportunities to get involved with great emerging technologies, whatever that might be, I think the opportunities are tremendous. I'd love to see women play a larger role in leading the way and pioneering, and foraying into uncharted territories. I think that we have an amazing capability for working creatively through problems. I once heard a talk about a physiological aspect of women, that many women have a wider corpus callosum, that the brain is just wired for interconnectivity between the hemispheres, and that we have this amazing ability to do this. And what I'd love to see is for all of us to have that opportunity to work collaboratively together and to incentivize this kind of behavior as well. That's a great future for us that we can all participate in together. It's not just about women. I often talk about the fact that the thing about our human race is that we are so diverse. And so, not always is that diversity celebrated. Not all of that is made available. We are not often included. And so what I like to look at from my particular perspective as being an immigrant in this country, from being a woman of color, so to speak, and I look at the world around me and saying, well, there's just a lot of unjust ways that things are being done. And so the greater tomorrow is by bringing everybody to the table and being active participants in a decision-making process, by having women being involved, not just in the technology, but leading the way in technology, because I think what we bring is a very different, unique type of leadership that I think the world absolutely needs. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that being part of that conversation. I am a part of that conversation and looking forward to even greater things.
Yes. Do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
Definitely not. Definitely not. The evidence is just astounding. My younger son is an aspiring astrophysicist, and he's going to enter senior year in high school. And, he is looking at the heavens beyond and saying, there's too many of us, I think, who are big proponents of, we can't have such an arrogant view that we're unique in this universe, right? Or even multiverse, for that matter. I mean, it depends on which theory you embrace. But I think that, even just in our galaxy alone, so let alone the multitudes of other galaxies that exist, it's so arrogant to think that we're alone in this world. That's just not possible at all, physically not possible. Whether we cross paths, that's a different question altogether. Either another race is so beyond us that they look at us and say, oh my God, they're so backward, we don't even want to interact with them, or they might be not as ahead as we are, and so they can't interact. So the timing of things, obviously, that's a big thing. Are we going to need that other race? I don't know, but are we the only race? Absolutely not.
Do you think we're in a simulation?
Wow. Blue pill, red pill moment. Sometimes it feels like it, doesn't it? Sometimes I think there's moments. Think about...
What are those moments for you that make it feel
Deja
like
vus, I think.
What exactly about the deja vu?
I have sometimes really strong deja vus that even just amaze me, saying down to the last detail of that moment, saying, I've lived this moment before. This has passed by before. This is not the first time I've gone through this. This is not the first time I've said this, or what have you, contextually as well as explicitly. And that's always just makes me sit up and thinking, well, that was different. It's not just a deja vu, I actually experienced this before. So what was that all about, right? And so those moments that you just go, wow, maybe we are in a simulation. I think that, sometimes things just happen the way they do in a manner in which you personally could not have orchestrated it that way. And you couldn't have had the foresight to have it happen that particular way. And so those are the moments that you think, maybe there is something behind that. What about you?
I do really like deja vu.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the coolest things to go back to is deja vu. Yeah. If we could reverse the time to go back to a moment,
yes.
It would be really interesting to go back to deja vu and just pause and just observe and be like, what is this feeling right now? Yeah, because it goes by in just like 3 seconds sometimes, and it's just too fast.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I think, it's not just even that. In my culture, we talk about multiple lifetimes, right? And there's those moments too,
Definitely.
Along the same vein. Maybe not quite exactly, but along the same vein of it, you meet somebody and you say, my God, I've just met this person. I feel like I've known him for millennia, what was that connection all about, right? It's like two souls that meet that had crossed paths before, that spent time in a different lifetime before, and you go, wow, that was not real. There's no way that I could know this person so well, but I do, I know them, I understand them, right? And so those moments of multiple lifetimes, I think also those are those flashbacks, I think, in through history, and those are moments of pause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in what exists outside of the 3D world.
Definitely.
So let's tap into that fabric and figure out exactly what's going on. Radhika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure being. Great questions, by the way. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Yeah, we really enjoyed you teaching us. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much.
Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot We learned a lot about blockchain. We learned a lot about its applications, the way that it helps businesses, as well as the different protocols that are being built for the future. You got me thinking about pharma and healthcare and all of the insurance applications, manufacturing applications. Man, you got me thinking so much about that. Enterprise 37,000, 34,000.
37,000, I think, projects that are out there that are it's growing.
That is nuts. Pilots, and let's see where they're going to be leveraging blockchain and how we're going to.
Some of those I think are going beyond pilots, but it's exciting.
And then how that's going to impact transparency in the world and so much more. So everyone, if you guys had a good time, definitely give us share the content with other people, get talking more about blockchain, get talking about more about the impact that's making on the world. Subscribe below, give us a comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Also, go create with this content. Don't just consume, but go make something, go make a video, go make a blog post about it, go talk to other people, maybe start a company. And lastly, join us on Patreon so we can continue coming to great places like the Women in Technology Summit here and continue having fantastic conversation and sharing that content with you. So thank you so much, everyone. Much love.
Thank you.